Welcome back to Around the Table with Stacey Smith as we take a look at the economy and investing. And let's stay with stocks for a moment. Every person or household is different, but a common theme in investing through the years is that the older you get, the less risk you should take so that your savings last as long as possible. That seems like great advice, but more people are beginning to ignore that advice. The headline for a recent story in the Wall Street Journal read, "America's retirees are investing more like 30-year-olds." It went on to say that at Vanguard, 25% of investors 75 to 84 have all of their money in stocks. Shana, your reaction to that?
Typically, as we age, investors begin to shift their portfolio from an allocation to stocks and bonds, really just to preserve what you've accumulated over the years. But having all your money in stocks at a late age isn't necessarily bad. One of the people quoted in that article, Stacey, said he was living off his Social Security payments and investing heavily in the stock market. So if your Social Security payment or maybe a pension or both provides the income that you need to live comfortably, then maybe investing more in stocks is right for you. You know, the other factor to consider is longevity risk. People are living longer and they're retiring early. They used to retire at 65. Now they're retiring at 62. Some of that was as a result of the pandemic. So some investors may be trying to compensate for not working as long as they thought that they would have. So, you know, whatever the allocation is to stocks or bonds, it's really important that you make sure it fits within your risk profile and meets your cash flow needs.
Bob, your thoughts?
The reason that it's postulated, and I believe it, that the shift for older folks more heavily into stocks is that bonds, number one, were yielding so low, and they're not getting what they used to get, and that is a growth in the principal as interest rates dropped. Conversely, as interest rates went up, the value of bonds went down. So that soured the older investor and said, I got a better chance in stocks than I do in bonds. That's a short-term phenomenon, because if we expect that interest rates will fall in the next year or two, then bonds will go up in value. That's not the way you put bonds in your portfolio. Bonds are meant to provide income and a stabilization, because bonds will never fluctuate as much as stocks. So Shana nailed it, I think, as depends on for whom are you investing? You investing for your children, your grandchildren? Well, then you have a long time horizon. If you're investing for yourself and you need income, well, then you better stay with a balanced portfolio. The balance depends on your situation. But there's nothing wrong with an older person to be 100% in stocks if they have enough assets that they're not going to outlive, and they're investing for subsequent generations. Remember, we're only a steward of what we've accumulated. They're not bearing it with us. So you got to consider what happens to the money later on and who's going to use it to what extent.
Wait a minute, you can't take it with you?
No, I've been trying to convince you of that. We're gonna start digging up in your backyard, Stacey.
Frank, your thoughts? Or Kim, go ahead.
Another thing to consider is, I agree with everyone, and I am surprised at how many people on this show are like, yeah, sure, if you have cash flow, do it, right? That's essentially what we're saying. But if you think that you can be smarter than the market and you don't have cash flow, you're not. Because here's what's going to happen. The market knows that you're in it and it hates you, and it's going to be down one day. You're going to need money, and you're going to have to sell stocks that you don't want to sell at prices you're going to have to, you have to sell, right? I'm being sarcastic, but it's true that if you do not have sufficient resources to cover your cash flow, you are exposing yourself to downside risk, and it's a problem. So don't do it. But if you have cash, go ahead and do it.
Stacey, there's three of us here that work with, not so much me anymore, but that have worked with clients on a one-to-one basis. And every one of us at one time or other has said that we take a certain amount of money, 1, 2, 3, 4 years worth of cash flow needs, and set it aside. This way it takes the need to sell to meet your cash flow requirements away, and you put you in a position that the roller coaster becomes less of a problem. And that roller coaster, as last year played out unlike any time in history, or at least in Bob and I haven't seen this. We saw it over 10 years, but not over one, where bonds went down more than stocks, or as much as stocks. And that's because interest rates rose an unprecedented amount in 1 year. And that's not likely to happen this year or next, but there's no one who has a crystal ball that knows the true answer to that question.
So let me
You
pose this
also-
question, and it would be to Bob and to Shana and Frank, because Kim, you don't advise individual investors on how to their personal finances. You advise about particular stocks. So through this time period, how well did most of your clients do? If I can ask that question, I'm not looking for exact numbers here, but did most people were they able to ride this through, or did you have a lot of panic going on?
Yeah, I think we've been educating our clients, Stacy, about those panic periods. So they're almost, I don't want to say getting used to it, but it becomes a little more normal that now they understand to just ride through it, because we can show and look back to history to say, the market would recover after 1 to 2 years if we look at the financial crisis in 2008. So generally speaking, from my perspective, we're through most of that. So that's why staying the course, we talk about it a lot of times here on the show about not moving to cash. That's why you don't want to go to cash.
I'm going to agree completely with Shana and add another perspective. Bonds fluctuate in value. That doesn't mean you've lost money. It just fluctuates in value. And the longer the time until maturity, the greater the fluctuation. Conversely, the shorter time to maturity, the lesser the fluctuation. So if you expect bonds to be volatile in fluctuation, keep your maturity shorter. Don't have long bonds. And that will give you the courage of your conviction to stay with the good, well-constructed bond part of your portfolio.
All right, great. We have to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment.